So, recently, me and my partner sat down to play Alice Madness Returns. Neither of us knew much about it, only giving the game a go because as a kid, my partner wanted to play it, but their parents wouldn't let them. So now we settled down and opened the game, and it opens with Alice's face being ripped off. We knew it was going to be gritty based off the box cover alone, but both of us were in complete shock at what we just saw, and quite frankly, thrilled for what awaited us in Wonderland. So, right after the face shedding scene, we find ourselves in Alice's therapy session with a suspiciously bad therapist who just insists that Alice forget all of her pain, all of her memories, just let it go away. Then makes her go get her normal pills and sends in the next kid to give even worse advice.
Now, Charlie, your pa was hung for killing your ma who beat you. Let's forget that, shall we?
On your way to get the pills, you spot a cat, and you do what any Alice in Wonderland story would do and follow it down the rabbit hole, or in this case, dingy alleyway, in which Alice seems to hallucinate and is attacked by several monstrous creatures, only to be snapped out of it by a seemingly nice old lady. Except no, this old lady is anything but nice, because she forcefully bribes Alice, who apparently has told the old lady that she was the one responsible for her parents' death, which by the way apparently her whole family died in a house fire, and the old lady was the one responsible for bringing her out of the insane asylum, which apparently Alice was in. So, she pawns Alice to go get her booze. This not-so-nice lady then brings Alice to look at her pigeons, then says the equivalent of, "I need booze, Alice," which spirals Alice into yet another hallucination, this time flinging her all the way back into Wonderland. This is where we learn basic platforming and game mechanics and get to meet some familiar faces, such as the Cheshire Cat, who's now skinny and covered in tribal tattoos. By God, what the actual hell? You're telling me this mangy feline has tribal tattoos? But while we're here on the topic of whatever the heck this guy is trying to be, let me take a second to talk about the characters in this game, because both the old lady and the Cheshire Cat set up future expectations with other characters, because everyone else in the real world is evil and hates Alice and treats her like garbage just as much as the old lady. Except the nanny we meet later, she's nice, but she's also a 100 gex worker. But mainly nice. And all of the Wonderland characters are just as effed up as Mr. Shit-Eating Grin we see here. This sounds like a complaint, but I swear it's pretty cool. And none of the other ones appropriate culture quite like the Putty Cat, I think. Back to the game, we're taught that we have 3 jumps and a glide, and that when needed, we can shrink in size. And shrinking in this game makes you fit to smaller crevices, as well as giving you this sort of enhanced vision to see platforms that are difficult to see while large. These 3 jumps and shrinking pretty much makes up the entirety of Alice's platforming moveset. And while a bit novel compared to the other games at times, each level introduces new complications that Alice must overcome using the tools at her disposal, keeping the gameplay fresh on a per level basis. But this is only half of the coin, because on the other side lies the combat. And the combat in this game is interesting, not so much in the actual mechanics, because it functions very similar to like a Zelda game with the lock-on pivoting system you can see here, but the enemies. Look, you got black tar babies, flying black tar babies, giant worm-like black tar babies, and each level also spices in unique enemies, like these small British people in the Mad Hatter level, or these fish with legs later on as well. The combat loop is based off of 5 tools you progressively unlock throughout the game. The Vorpal Blade, used for basic attacks and damage. The Pepper Grinder, which is what happens if you turn a pepper grinder into a COD death machine, is used for range attacks and puzzle solving. You also get a detonatable bomb, which can be used as a decoy in combat, and for puzzle solving with pressure plates or breakable walls. Then you get the Hobby Horse, which functions as the heavy attack. It's slower, but can be used to break guards and walls. Then the game's last unlockable item is the Fussy Teapot, which can shoot an area of effect projectile and can be used to break breakable walls from a distance. Ooh. And all of the weapons, aside from the decoy bomb, are upgradable by collecting teeth across the level. The combat shines when thrown against multiple enemies and having to figure out the best way to beat them, but admittedly gets a bit repetitive once you figure out, oh, I can beat this guy by doing this thing and then doing this thing. The game would try to add difficulty at that point by adding more enemies to slay, but it either made things more tedious by just staying back and peppering them with my grinder, or more annoyingly by completely clusterfucking the lock-on system, and by proxy, camera. Which brings up another complaint, that being the camera lock-on system has your typical lock-on jank that you would find in those older Zelda games, something I didn't want to see carried over. But that sums up most of the gameplay systems. It definitely has its charms, and while the core loop seems familiar, Alice has enough variation of unique ideas that it doesn't quite feel like a rip-off as much as it does a charming reiteration. Speaking of charm, this game's design has a round-way trip of it. Every section of Wonderland and London have tons of effort put into its design, and just the idea of seeing what comes next and how other Wonderland characters would look in this style is what kept me going through the game. On a surface level, it can be easy to look at this game as something trying to emulate a Burton style, to which I disagree with you wholeheartedly, because this game's design, writing, and world feel like it has so much substance and a message that can be lacking in the somewhat tacky in comparison Burton movie. Whether trying to be a horror game, an adventure game, or whatever is tickling its fancy, the devs put their whole mind and soul into making this game have life and soul. It's truly captivating. I encourage you to try this game out for yourself, if not for the visuals alone. Aside from some bad hair animations, this 2011 game has aged amazingly. And the story they're telling is also good too. To go back to what I was talking about characters, the story follows a loop where Alice is doing stuff in the real world, like getting pills or going to a brothel, when suddenly, wham, PTSD attack into Wonderland, where she tries to stop the destruction of Wonderland going on within it. In her journey, she'll run into an old acquaintance, help them, they tell her to go somewhere else, rinse and repeat. Eventually, we learn that what's destroying Wonderland is this train running through Wonderland, destroying everything in its wake. So Alice's goal becomes to get to the train to turn around and stop it. I don't want to spoil the closing half of the game because both the imagery and narrative really amps itself up into something quite unique and interesting. Just know that if you thought the stuff I've shown you is crazy, dude, it gets crazier. Way crazier. I've gushed about this game quite a bit by now, but there is a huge problem with it. It's super fluffed out. Like every level, while beautiful, goes on for so freaking long. It feels like each level is 30% larger than it should be. And what starts as a spectacle can turn into a headache as you thirst for something new. It's not even an instance where each level just has so much to give you, because nearly every single level has a moment where a Wonderland person goes, "Oh, Alice, I'll help you, but you gotta fetch me my wallet, my left arm, and go break up with my girlfriend." Then you go do these 3 things and wham, it's just all cookie cutter platforming. Or you have a unique gameplay thing that's cool the first time, but then they make you do it 3 more times. It's like everything in this game operates on rules of thirds, and it's just flat out annoying. I wouldn't mind if the game was short, especially if this three-peat nonsense was the only way they could pad out runtime. It's such a problem for me that it's the reason I'd consider this game not a masterpiece, because the game just drags on way too much. If it didn't have that drag, this game would be amazing. It would be one of my favorite games ever. But that said, the drag is not enough to warrant not playing it in the first place, because the greatness around these duller moments more than make up for its shortcomings. Overall, Alice was a pleasant surprise, and is undoubtedly the most batshit insane game I've ever got my hands on. If I'd had to rate it, I'd rate it going to a really awesome art museum, but whenever you're ready to move on and look at the next beautiful painting, an art curator shows up and just insists that you look at it for another hour and that you do his laundry while you're at it. Peace and love. Eyesore signing out.
Let me